Welcome to meeting number 11 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Today, the committee is beginning its study on differential outcomes in immigration, refugees, and citizenship Canada decisions. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor English or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. The raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen can be used at any time if you wish to speak or alert the chair. Before we begin, I have a few administrative matters to raise with the committee. So first of all, we have received a request to appear on this study from OCASI, Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants. OCASI is an umbrella organization for the immigrant and refugee serving sector in Ontario, the largest of its kind in Canada. Is it the will of the committee to extend an invitation to OCASI to appear on the study of differential outcomes? What is the will of the members? Is everyone okay with it, or any objections? Okay. Doesn't seem to be. Agreed. So we can extend an invitation, Madam Clerk, to OCASI to appear on the study of differential outcomes. One more thing before we get into the witnesses for today. We have received a large volume of useful data and evidence during the committee's recent study of recruitment and acceptance rates of foreign students. The analysts have confirmed that pertinent data could inform our current study on differential outcomes. So is it the will of the committee that the evidence and documentation received by the committee during the study of recruitment and acceptance rate of foreign students be taken into consideration by the committee during the study of differential outcomes in immigration, refugees, and citizenship Canada? Is everyone okay that we can use that? Any objections? Seeing none, so that's agreed. We can use that. Now we will begin our study on differential outcomes in immigration, refugees, and citizenship Canada's decision. It is my pleasure to introduce the first witnesses of this important study. So in our first panel, we have Stephen Murans, immigration lawyer, coming here as an independent, Jennifer Maidema, Executive Director of Remember Ministries, and Dr. Gideon Christian, President of African Scholars Initiative. I would like to welcome all the witnesses for appearing before the committee today. I would like to take a few moments for the benefit of the witnesses. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like in a regular committee meeting. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. So with that, I welcome our witnesses. And all the witnesses will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. And after those opening remarks, we will proceed to the round of questioning. So with that, we will begin with Mr. Stephen Murans, the immigration lawyer. Mr. Murans, you have 5 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you. First, I want to say that it is an honor to participate in your study of differential outcomes in Canadian visa officer decisions. When I look at the subtopics in this study, I can't help but think that a significant portion of the relevant data and information to these topics has only been obtained through Access to Information Act results that private individuals have shared online. Given this, I want to focus my presentation today on transparency. The only way that one can properly review whether there is systemic bias in Canada's immigration programs is if the relevant information is easily available to the public. I want to suggest a few ways to achieve this. First, prior to 2016, IRCC posted quarterly processing times and approval rates for all of its programs by visa office. The information showed what had actually occurred at a given office and was very useful. IRCC stopped doing this after 2015. The government's website currently says that they stopped doing this because IRCC wanted to post only global information. While IRCC may have a goal that all applications are processed the same regardless of visa office, I think everyone knows that this is not the case in practice. I would suggest that IRCC bring back the visa office specific quarterly updates. Second, IRCC should publish as downloadable PDFs Access to Information Act results that pertain to internal manuals, visa office specific training guides on assessing the genuineness of a marriage, and other similar documents. Right now, it is possible for the public to search the titles of previous completed requests, but then the individuals have to wait for them to be emailed, which can take several weeks. And again, I don't think most of the public knows that this is possible. The British Columbia government, meanwhile, publishes as downloadable PDFs all non-individual specific previously disclosed freedom of information releases. The approach is a model for transparency that I believe IRCC should follow. Third, IRCC should, in my opinion, publish detailed explanation and reports of how its artificial intelligence triaging and new processing tools work in practice. Almost everything public to date has been attained through access to information results that are heavily redacted and which I don't believe present the whole picture. For example, in late 2020, it was revealed through ATIP that all visitor visa applications from China and India have gone through an AI triage since at least 2018. It is not clear how this AI triage works. I shared an online internal IRCC document from 2018 about the triage of these applications from India and China. It stated that while AI triaged files, visa officers were not told why a file was triaged a certain way so that officers still reviewed applications. The document then had a 2020 footnote which stated, quote, officers are now provided with key facts about the client to reduce the time spent searching for information, end quote. The implication seems to be that the department does not want officers reading entire applications, and there needs to be more transparency about this. IRCC presents the Chinook processing tool, and to a lesser extent AI, as just an Excel spreadsheet and a change in process. However, the Polaris Strategic Insight final report says that an IRCC employee or employees expressed, quote, concern that increased automation of processing will embed racially discriminatory practices in a way that will be harder to see over time, end quote. It is not clear why an Excel spreadsheet would do that, and it would be great to hear more from the person or people who said this to learn what they are seeing on the ground. Now, their concerns and mine may not be fully accurate, but in the absence of increased transparency, concerns like this are only growing. To conclude, in order for this committee to provide ongoing meaningful insight and oversight into whether there are differential outcomes in decisions based on race and region, the department needs to be more transparent and publish information which reflects what is actually happening rather than what the government's or the department's goals are. And those are my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mearns. We will now proceed to Madame Jennifer Maidema, Executive Director for Remember Ministries. Ms. Maidema, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm thankful to be able to join you and speak to you today on behalf of the refugees that I work with and serve. I am founder and director of Remember Ministries, a charitable organization focused on sponsoring refugees to Canada, particularly those who have been persecuted for their faith and religious activities. I have been very involved for the past 7 years in sponsoring refugees through Canada's private refugee sponsorship program and helping others to do the same. I want to say that the private refugee sponsorship program is an amazing and worthwhile program. And I know many, many people in Canada who are enormously thankful to be empowered to help refugees in this way. It harnesses the generosity of Canadians and encourages the spirit of welcome in our communities, and it makes our country stronger. I know the committee is studying systemic discrimination leading to differential outcomes in IRCC decisions. I can't speak about any of the technology used in the application process. I can only speak about what I know. When I've asked newcomers and refugees if they've experienced any overt discrimination from the IRCC or visa office workers, they all said no. However, that is not to say there is not systemic discrimination within IRCC processes or in how our government chooses to prioritize certain refugee populations over
Sorry for
others.
interrupting. If you can please raise your mic a bit. Yeah, there is some perfect. Oh,
Is that better?
yes.
Sorry about that. This seems to be the case because of the expediting of some populations of refugees and the long wait times for others. Allocation of resources tells you where priorities are placed or who favored populations are. Resources do not seem to go towards the processing of private refugee sponsorships, which leads one to believe that those refugees are not a priority. Current processing times for privately sponsored refugees in Ethiopia, Kenya, Sudan, South Africa are 31 to 37 months. For refugees in Malaysia and Thailand, 37 months. For those in Pakistan, 38 months. For those in Lebanon, it is 46 months, almost 4 years. And that's a country where the citizens are experiencing terrible fuel, medicine, and food shortages. So imagine what it is like for refugees there. So for those refugees who go through the proper procedure and are fortunate enough to have sponsors in Canada providing finances and support upon their arrival here, it will take them 3 to 4 years for their paperwork to be processed. And I don't have words in this short testimony to explain how damaging these wait times are. Members of these refugee families die while waiting, and children are not in school during crucial years of their lives. And of course, one will naturally compare these wait times with the situation for Ukrainian refugees being welcomed now through an expedited visa process, Afghan refugees, some of whom the IRCC expedited applications for as they tried to meet their promised numbers. And we remember the prioritization of Syrian refugees when the war broke out. Please do not think that I am being critical of expediting these people in immediate danger and need. None of us would argue against helping these refugees in the most compassionate and efficient way. What I question is reallocation of resources away from other refugees who have been waiting for months and years. And I question reducing the numbers of other refugees being welcomed in the same year so that more of one population can be welcomed. What is needed is the ability to find new resources to help people in the current crisis and never to put some people in a favored category over others. We need to increase the total number of refugees welcomed when there is a crisis, not renege on welcoming others whose applications are already waiting. Eritreans have been fleeing one of the most repressive regimes on the planet for years and years. It is a continuous flow of refugees. And yet a special program is never put in place for them. A special program has never been put in place for any African refugee group that I know of. It is good for this committee to examine what is happening in all manner of processes within the IRCC. It is good to ask if Canada's value of equality is being properly represented by government mandates to the IRCC and the IRCC systems themselves. Vulnerable people are vulnerable people. It shouldn't be a popularity contest between refugees. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to our last witness for this panel, Dr. Christian, President of African Scholars Initiative. Dr. Christian, you can please begin. You will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and member Initiative ASI Canada to make submission on your study. I will limit my opening remark to 2 main issues. First, the differential outcome in study visa decisions by IRCC relating to applications from Africa. And secondly, the growing use of artificial intelligence technology by IRCC in visa processing. Madam Chair, data on study visa refusals from IRCC clearly shows that countries in sub-Saharan Africa are most adversely impacted by differential outcome on study visa decisions by IRCC. The Polaro report revealed that systemic bias, discrimination, and racism account for this. from outright reference to African countries as the dated 30 by IRCC visa officers, to outright branding of Nigerians as corrupt and untrustworthy. IRCC study visa policies have been designed in ways that makes it ever more difficult for people from Africa to be able to secure study visa to pursue education in Canada. In my appearance before this committee on 8 February 2022, I highlighted these discriminatory policies by comparing two visa application programs, the Student Direct Stream, SDS, and the Nigerian Student Express, NSE, especially the differential or discriminatory financial requirements under the NSE program. In addition, I will also note the language requirements under the NSE program, which requires a Nigerian study visa applicant to undertake English language proficiency to prove to the visa officer that they are proficient in English language. This requirement is imposed notwithstanding that English is the only official language in Nigeria. It is the official language of instruction in all formal academic institutions in Nigeria. Foreign students from Nigeria are exempted from English language proficiency by all academic institutions in Canada, but not by IRCC. This subtle bias, discriminatory and differential study visa requirements inevitably result in adverse differential outcome in decisions, not just for Nigeria, but for Africa. My second submission relates to the growing use of computer software and artificial intelligence technology by IRCC in visa processing. ASI Canada is not opposed to some use of AI technologies by IRCC. IRCC has in its possession a great deal of historical data that can enable it to train AI and automate its visa application processes. But Madam Chair, there are serious concerns here. External study of IRCC, especially the Polara report, has revealed systemic bias, racism, and discrimination in IRCC processing of immigration applications. Inevitably, this historical data in possession of IRCC is tainted by the same systemic bias, racism, and discrimination. Now, the problem is that the use of this tainted data to train any AI algorithm will inevitably result in algorithmic racism, racist AI making immigration decisions. Madam Chair, as an assistant professor of AI and law at the University of Calgary Faculty of Law, I have spent the last 3 years researching algorithmic racism, and I can confidently state that the concerns raised here are legitimate and real. Any use of AI technology by IRCC should be subject to external scrutiny. IRCC should be subject to the oversight that will ensure and enhance transparency and fairness in the use of AI. In conclusion, we recommend an independent oversight of IRCC in 2 ways. 1, an independent on-board person to oversee decisions of IRCC visa officers. Secondly, the establishment of an independent body of experts to oversee IRCC's use of advanced analytics and artificial intelligence technology in visa processing. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I look forward to your questions on the issues that I have raised, as well as any other question you may have on differential outcome on IRCC decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christian, and thanks to all the witnesses for their opening remarks. We will now start our round of questioning, and we will begin with Mr. Helen. Mr. Helen, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. My first question is to Mr. Meerens. We've heard the testimony. We've heard out of the Polara report the disturbing cases of how people from African communities are being treated, and the employees of IRCC are being treated. There is systemic racism going on at IRCC. In your experience, do you see any current safeguards the way things are right now?
don't see any safeguards beyond the fact that individuals who may have experienced refusals can, of course, challenge them. However, there isn't anything like an ombudsperson that, say, exists where people can express concern if they do feel like they've experienced bad treatment.
Thank you. To each one of the witnesses today, do you think that a task force is enough to tackle these issues?
If I may go in here, further to what the only recourse now seems to be a federal court. But the problem here now is that the federal court is being overwhelmed with judicial review applications involving IRCC. Last time I checked, which is a couple of days ago, 72% of judicial review application before federal court involves IRCC. Decisions made by, most of them decisions made by IRCC. So I think having an independent ombudsperson will go a long way in not just kind of dealing with this issue, but also reducing the amount of workload before the federal court relating to decisions from IRCC. So it's very important to kind of have an independent ombudsperson where individuals who have experienced discrimination or adverse decision from IRCC can complain without necessarily having to take the very expensive process of going through the federal court, and thus overburdening the federal court with decisions on sometimes mostly unreasonable decisions made by IRCC visa officers.
Thank you. The other witnesses, please.
What I'd like to add is, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the Polaris Strategic Insight Report contains statements such as IRCC employees expressing concerns that AI will perpetuate systemic bias, and as Professor Christian noted, a reference to one person, at least one person, referring to the dirty 30 from Africa. And I do think a task force of some form, it would be great to see follow-up, because right now these sentences and allegations in the Polaris Strategic Insight Report are just hanging there. And it would be great to see follow-up with those people, whether through a task force or through this committee, to just learn more about what is going on.
Yes, I would concur with the other two witnesses. Certainly, a task force would be a good starting point, and an ombudsman certainly sounds like something that would be good. More needs to be investigated to see what the situation is.
Thank you so much. And just to your point, Mr. Murins, like to date, we know that no one has been reprimanded or fired for any of the allegations that have been taking place. So it seems like things are dragging on without any action to date. Again, to each one of the witnesses, do you feel that racism within IRCC is contributing to this historic almost 2 million in backlogs in immigration?
We don't have like data or statistics before us to kind of be able to pinpoint whether racism is the reason. But the fact is that when you go to the Polaris report, that report is very damning on IRCC when it comes to racism. And that report makes it very clear that racism plays a role in immigration decisions. So if we go by that fact, then of course it won't be too far-fetched to say that racism could also play a role in the backlog we are currently having, though it will be very difficult to say that racism is the sole reason for the backlog. But if racism is endemic, the way it has been portrayed in the Polaris report, then definitely it contributes, or it could be a contributing factor to the backlog, even though it might not be the sole factor for the backlog.
I was thinking about the question. I think the main cause of the backlog was just the department opening up several new applications and one large express entry draw. And I think that is the main cause of the backlog. I don't, at least thinking about it now, view systemic racism as being a great contributing factor to it.
Yes, I don't think it was the main factor. It certainly could be a factor, but there'd be such complex reasons behind these huge wait times right now with COVID and the other actions that the government took to bring in groups of refugees. So I don't have the knowledge to be able to answer that question any better.
Thank you. I'll just use the rest of my time to ask if each one of the witnesses could table any data they have or any information they have in regards that would help to this report to address this systemic racism in IRCC. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hallan. And now we will proceed to Mr. Al-Khoury. Mr. Al-Khoury, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And welcome to our guests. Your presence here is much appreciated by the committee. My first question is addressed to Ms. Miedma Dama. I'm very touched by the work you do. I really appreciate it. Humanity needs people like you, people who help others who are having difficulty living peacefully in their countries. I think that this mission that you've undertaken is extraordinary. Could you please describe certain issues for us, issues that your organization faces? You mentioned many countries where the file processing time varies greatly, particularly with regard to French-speaking, Francophone African students. Could you discuss this issue in particular?
Thank you very much for the question and for your comments. I appreciate that. I don't deal with students, so I can't address what you said about the French-speaking students. I am helping refugees from all over the world connect with communities and volunteers, churches in Canada who can sponsor them. Issues that I see in the work that I do, certainly it's these long wait times that are extraordinarily difficult for refugees. It is a sacred thing to raise the hopes of a refugee. And once they are raised, when you submit that application for them to go through months and then a year or 2 years without any contact from the visa office, to have to wait 3 years or close to that time for an interview is very, very difficult for their mental health. And that affects their physical health, that affects their family dynamics and marriages, so many things. One of the issues that we had too is that one of my refugees was accepted just before COVID hit. And so we had to place that on hold. He was in South Sudan, an Eritrean refugee. And then we didn't hear any communication. I had to ask my member of parliament to please check on the case. For months, we still didn't know until we found out in late 2021 that his medical had expired in February 2021, but nobody had told him. Nobody had told anybody. That visa office didn't communicate. And then he was told to try to get a new medical, but there are no panel approved physicians in South Sudan. So we have been in a difficult situation with no medicals provided and yet an expired medical. There are sometimes just things that make you feel like there's some disorganization at the visa office level, lack of communication with the refugees themselves. And COVID caused chaos on many levels, but I think that this disorganization exists even outside of that. So I would just ask that more resources be put towards visa offices and more communication be given to refugees, or an ability to sign in online and see what status or where their application is at. And an ombuds person would be very helpful when there is an issue. We don't really have anybody that we can go to when there's a problem at a visa office. We just have to wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma deuxième question.
My second question is addressed to Mr. Murrens. Mr. Murrens, we know very well that when a student receives a student visa, that student must study full-time here. If the student begins to study part-time, then this student visa status may be lost. In your opinion, what is the difference between the various institutions with regard to full-time studies? Can you give us any more info? Moreover, how can we ensure departments that the students are here to stay and to study?
Yeah, the requirement that students study full-time is one that was brought in around 2014. The department treats all designated learning institutions the same as far as that requirement goes. For postgraduate work permits, which is the ability to work in Canada after graduating, students have to have studied full-time. There's little sympathy given right now to students who may have to study part-time because of family needs or mental health issues. And a big issue that arises is that to get a postgraduate work permit, a student must have studied full-time in every semester except for the final semester. So it's always been a bit, I think, unfair to students who say study part-time in one semester of year 2 of a 4-year degree for whatever reason. Those students will not be able to stay in Canada to work after graduating, while those who study full-time except for the last semester can. And it's something that I'd like to see changed.
Your time is up, Mr. El-Khoury. Yeah, time. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel-Duceppe.
Mr. Brunel-Duceppe, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses here today who are helping us with this important study. I'll go right to the point since I don't have a lot of time. Mr. Christian, I have a question for you first. I appreciated your speech very much. The department seems to have trouble with regard to racism in the department. This is unconscious bias, we've learned. But when you're talking about African nations as the dirty 30, or when certain managers say that Latin Americans come here only to receive social welfare, well, do you agree with you, Dr. Christian, that we're far from unconscious bias here?
I believe the question is for me.
Oui.
Yes. Very much. I think the expressions used on those reports, though, is not it's a clear case of outright bias, not unconscious bias. So when you look at those terms, individuals from a particular country being branded as untrustworthy and corrupt, some as being coming to Canada just for social security benefits, and then a continent or greater part of a continent being referred to as deity. This is not unconscious bias. This is conscious bias or discrimination. It is explicit racism, not unconscious racism. I'm not saying that there are no cases of unconscious bias, but if you go by the terms used here, these are deliberate terms that are used by individuals. And it is irrespective of what the individual might be thinking, but I think anybody looking at it from a reasonable perspective will know that, no, this is inappropriate, not even from a government managers in a government department. And it is unfortunate that these are the same individuals that will now have to sit down and consider the application from the same people that has been referred to as being corrupt, untrustworthy, or from this continent that has been referred to as being dirty.
Donc vous êtes d'accord?
So you agree with me, Mr. Christian, that we need to state things as they are. There is racism at IRCC, period.
I know it's very uncomfortable raising the issue of racism, but the fact is that we need to call racism out for what it is, as uncomfortable as it might be. That is the only way we can identify the problem and address the problem. Running away from the problem or kind of trying to whitewash the problem doesn't really solve it. yes, this is a clear case of racism, and we should call it that. We should actually be having conversation around this problem with clear framework as to how to address it. The problem is there. We shouldn't run away from it. I'm not running away from it. I'm very happy to discuss it and also proffer solution as to how we can deal with it, even at IRCC level.
Ben justement,
And I fully agree with you. My mother has always said that to solve a problem, you first need to be able to state what the problem is, and you've clearly demonstrated that. Thank you very much. You spoke of two solutions. First of all, independent mediators, expert advisory groups that look at a specific problem as well. What about the position of ombudsman, creation of such a position at the IRCC? Both of your proposals would be covered by such a position if ever an ombudsman or ombudswoman were appointed to IRCC. Do you think that's a good suggestion?
I agree with the appointment of an ombudsperson, but the two areas I have highlighted are two different areas that it will be very difficult to have an individual that will be able to, deal with these two areas. When it comes to issue relating to artificial intelligence, use of artificial intelligence, you need a body of experts who specializes in that field. That is a very technical field. So you need a body of experts who specializes in that particular field to be able to deal with problems unique to IRCC's use of artificial intelligence technology. And even IRCC's internal documents show that there is a problem with regards to use of historical data and its ability to perpetuate bias. But this document does not actually indicate how to deal with the problem. Now, when it comes to problem relating to visa refusals, that's also another problem. The individual dealing with use of AI may not be knowledgeable, or individuals dealing with AI may not be knowledgeable with regards to issues relating to visa refusals. So that's why we kind of suggested having a sort of two-pronged approach in terms of solution, having an independent ombudsperson to deal with the visa refusal issues, and then having an independent body of experts to deal with the technical aspects, which has to do with the use of artificial intelligence, computer softwares, and advanced analytics.
Excusez-moi, je veux pas vous
Sorry, I hate to interrupt, but I've only got a minute left. I'd like to hear Mr. Murrins. You spoke about the lack of transparency at IRCC. How much of a problem is this lack of transparency in the department?
Oh, right now it's huge. The processing times stated on the IRCC website are inaccurate. The website itself says that it's inaccurate. And again, it's only through Access to Information Act results that we've learned that almost no caregiver files have been processed since 2019. All of pretty much everything we've learned about artificial intelligence and its usage at IRCC has been through Access to Information Act results. It's surprising to me, there's the federal court decisions regarding TRV refusals from China and India. Not a single one has mentioned the use of artificial intelligence because no one knew that it was playing a large role in the determination process. So the lack of transparency right now is huge.
Thank you. Time is up, Mr. Brunel de Sepp. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. You will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for their presentation. I'd like to start with Mr. Mearns, just to carry on with your comments about the lack of transparency, and particularly based on the information that you have secured, whether through ATIP, Freedom of Information, and other processes. Can you share with us what you have learned or what your concerns are with respect to the Chinook system?
So Chinook itself, Chinook is basically, as far as I can tell, an Excel spreadsheet that allows for the bulk processing of applications. My main concern with Chinook, my two main concerns with Chinook, number one is whether or not it is enabling officers to quickly process files, possibly on bulk, without actually reading the entirety of applications. My second concern is that thus far to date, IRCC has refused, even in the judicial review context, to provide the screenshots or documentation regarding how a file was processed within Chinook, what priority flags might have been raised by Chinook. And so I guess my two main concerns are that it's enabling, or I suspect that it's enabling bulk processing of applications without reading the files. And then again, just a lack of transparency as to how files are being assessed.
So just building on that issue, it is using a system that sort of help processing more expeditiously, I suppose, in terms of application. But in light of that process, and in light of the Polera report, where there is explicit discrimination as well as internal biases, attitudes within IRCC, when you put those two things together, and the fact that Chinook is actually created and developed by staff within IRCC, what concerns would you have then in the application of Chinook having embedded discriminatory views and biases in its development? So I'm going to ask that question to Professor Christian, please.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member, for the question. Comes in the problem software and advanced analytics has been absolute lack of transparency. Most of the information we know about these technologies are information that has been obtained through access to information report or request, not information that was made available by IRCC. Now, I can't even say exactly what Chinook is. We're told it's a computer software, it's an Excel sheet. But I have seen cases where some immigration lawyers did access to information request, and some aspect of Chinook was actually exempted from disclosure under Section 51, subsection 1 of the Access to Information Act. And Section 51 deals with international affairs and defense. So the problem I'm having then is, if Chinook is an ordinary Excel spreadsheet, why are you withholding disclosure of some information on Chinook based on Section 15 of Access to Information Act, which deals with international affairs and defense? So I think there is more to Chinook than we know, than IRCC is willing to disclose. And that is the transparency issue we're talking about. So if these matters are actually covered by national defense, let's have an independent body of experts analyze this and, of course, know what should be made available to the public and what should be withheld back. But now IRCC seems to be the judge and jury in their own matter, and that lacks transparency.
Thank you. Mr. Mearns, the same question to you.
Yeah, I think my overall criticism and concern with Chinook is perhaps actually best summarized by an ATIP that I received from a IRCC manager in the United States, and they considered using Chinook in the United States. Those visa offices in the United States tend to process criminal rehabilitation applications or visas from people from a multitude of countries. And the United States program manager said, I have the quote here, that Chinook is, quote, our office is not suitable for Chinook use, given each application presents unique circumstances that need to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, end quote. And then the manager later said that unlike visa offices, our caseload was, quote, not homogenous. So I think my concern with Chinook being used in some countries is it's clear that IRCC views, say, applications from China or India as being just homogenous, where people don't necessarily need to have their individual circumstances reviewed, unlike, say, people from the United States, at least as per that program manager.
That, as Professor Christian suggested, that there should be a dedicated review by specialists of the Chinook system. An independent review. Mr. Mearns.
Yes, I for sure think that.
Earlier, people talked about a task force. What do you think the mandate should be for the task force to review internal racism within IRCC? Mr. Mearns, and then Professor Christian.
I think the mandate should be similar to what the committee is studying now, with possibly the ability, I don't know how it would work in practice, but to interview directly employees at IRCC who may be able to shed more light as to what is actually happening as opposed to what the department's goals are.
I will agree with
Sorry
Stephen
for
on that.
interrupting. Time is up for Ms. Kwan. Maybe you will have an opportunity in the second round. We will now proceed to Mr. Janis. Mr. Janis, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Murins, this committee has specific powers respecting the ability to send for documents. Those powers are completely unfettered, and that's a core principle of our constitutional reality. So in the midst of hearing about the problems of transparency, the committee actually has within its power to take some steps to concretely help you solve them. I've been just wordsmithing on the fly here a possible draft motion that we could consider at a later date. I wonder if you can clarify specifically the data that you want, because then we can request and publish that data as a committee. It sounds like what you're looking for is rates of acceptance and refusal broken down by country and subnational region of application of what type of visa is being applied for, dating back to 2015. Is that correct? And is there any other information that you'd like us to send for and publish?
No, that's actually, so that the refusal and approval rates based on Visa Office can be obtained through Access to Information Act request. What I'd like to see is somehow learning from the actual people who process these files, how they are processing them in practice. And then Professor Christian, who's an expert in AI, might be able to speak more to something that would show what the keywords are in the AI triaging that goes on based on Visa Office. So how does the AI actually work? In Chinook, what are the keywords that are being inputted to flag files, and how things actually work on the ground with regards to the processing of applications?
Thank you. Just because of time limitations, what I'd like to ask all of our witnesses to do then is to send a follow-up in writing the specific information, if it's Chinook keywords, whatever it is, the specific information that the committee should request and publish, so that we can ensure that then you have the information going forward, and we have that information as well. So Professor Christian, Mr. Murins, Ms. Medina, if you'd like, could maybe just if you nod or say yes to confirm that you're able to do that in the next little bit, send us that information, and we will work on getting a motion adopted at this committee with respect to that.
Thank you. I'll be doing that.
Okay. Thank you. And even I will say as well, even information that's available through ATIP, given issues of redaction and also access, I think it's still worthwhile for the committee to include some of that information as part of a document request motion in order to publish that on our website and have ease of access. So, Ms. Medina, thank you for the incredible work you're doing with respect to refugees and for your testimony today. It has been an ongoing frustration for me talking to those involved in private sponsorship, the piling on of challenges, of red tape, of additional burdens. It seems like continually the approach is how do we squeeze private sponsors instead of empowering them and facilitating the great work that they do. And it also seems to me that that the fairest system and the way we welcome the most refugees is for the government to spend as much of its time and energy and resources getting behind private sponsors, including through more joint sponsorship programs. If we moved away from this public and private model separately and we put all those resources behind joint sponsorship, we could welcome more refugees, and those involved in those who are coming as refugees would benefit from being welcomed by a community, because I think private sponsored refugees have a huge advantage in terms of coming into existing communities of love and support, whereas government sponsored refugees who they have a level of financial support, but they don't have the kind of psychosocial support that comes with being part of a community. So I wonder if you share those ideas and concerns, and if you could just speak more to how we should be shifting from the current mentality, which is piling barriers on private sponsors, and talk about the things we can do to empower and strengthen and get more people saying yes to being involved in this work.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. You are bang on in everything that you are saying. There are some opportunities for partnership between government and private groups with the blended visa office referred sponsorships, which are great, but really we need more spots. There are many private sponsors ready to submit applications every year, and everybody is always fighting for spots. And I don't know why this is, because, you know, private people are bringing their own funds and willing to provide that settlement support for the first year.
Yeah,
So,
it's absolutely insane that
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up, Mr. Janus.
Help refugees and pay for it themselves.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. We will now proceed to Ms. Kaya Baga. Ms. Kaya Baga, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to start by thanking our witnesses for being here today. I'll go directly to Mr. Christian. You did talk about the discrimination that you see in AI collection. My understanding is that it collects data and provides it to decision makers who are humans. What other barriers do you see that are showing in this system of collecting that data and providing it to a human person that makes those decisions when it comes to refusal rates for African countries?
Thank you very much for the question, Honorable Member. So the AI, as it is being used by IRCC now, based on internal documents obtained, artificial intelligence, we're getting to the stage where IRCC is using AI to automate visa refusals. So we have a case of block processing of visa applications. And Sylvie made reference to this earlier, you know, lack of individuality in treating applications, because applications are kind of seems to be homogeneous, and which is not often the case. But my major concern with the use of this technology by IRCC is the fact that to train an AI algorithm, you need huge amounts of data. IRCC, inevitably, they have that data from historical collection of data. But the problem is that historically, you have been collecting data that seems to be kind of biased against particular group of people or particular continent. You know, now when you use that data to train an AI algorithm, what AI algorithm simply does is to kind of regurgitate those bias. This time it's even more difficult because it becomes more difficult to be able to identify this problem. So the problem we're having here, which are what I'm trying to highlight, is that if IRCC uses this data to train AI algorithm, which I believe they are doing now, without adequately trying to address the bias issue, we are going to have a situation where the problem we have identified in the Pollara report is now embedded into technology, and it becomes more difficult to identify. And this will continue to perpetuate the discrimination we have highlighted against people from the sub-Saharan African continent, especially study visa applications coming from that part of the world. And that is of great concern to us in ASI Canada.
Yeah. So I guess it goes right into my next question. Given that there's a higher rate of refusals in both English-speaking African countries and French-speaking African countries, I wonder if you're aware that Ghana, for example, serves about 13 countries. What suggestions would you make for RCC to improve that? I think it's easier to talk about AI that is collecting data that goes directly to a human decision maker. Is there maybe a resource issue in this situation?
The AI is an amazing technology. It performs tasks in fraction of time that it will take humans to perform those tasks. So in terms of efficiency, yes, AI will make tasks efficient. It will result in greater processing of greater application within the fraction of time it will take humans to do that. But
sorry, Mr. Christian, my question is around the resources that for maybe perhaps visa offices, increasing more offices in the continent. Ghana processes about 13 countries and oversees 26 other countries. What are your comments on that?
If we can, with regards to that, I would say if we can have more visa offices processing these applications, especially localized offices, visa offices processing the application, having more resources, more humans do the work than trying to outsource the work to technology will go a long way in addressing it. But also the humans, of course, who will be making this decision, of course, should be those who are trained to be able to identify bias, conscious and unconscious bias when we see one.
What would that training entail of? So let's say someone who is in, processing visa applications in Ghana, and they're located, they're processing a visa application form from, let's say, Kenya. How can they make that decision? What recommendation would you make for someone who is a little bit farther making those decisions? What would you want them to know? And if we were to increase those resources to make sure that they're accurate, what kind of recommendations would you make on that?
The individual making those decisions should be very conscious of individual circumstances of the applicants as they relate to where they are coming from. So being able to understand the cultural and individual circumstances of the applicants will go a long way in addressing this bias, rather than seeing individuals as being, corrupt just because of the area or the parts of the world they're coming from.
So that means that you're aware, Mr. Christian, that these decisions
Sorry
are
for
finally
interrupting,
made
Ms.
by
Kavaga.
a
Your time
human
is
and
up.
not AI.
We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Duceppe for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Brunel Duceppe.
Mr. Brunel Duceppe, thank you very much. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our witnesses for attending this session. We'll have your expertise for the drafting of our study. Mr. Meurens, you're an immigration lawyer. Is it possible, and I'm just theorizing here, that the underfunding of offices that decides visa means that the files aren't properly examined? If I'm working in a visa office, for example, and I am in charge of processing a number of files and the files pile up, will I not decide perhaps to refuse more people because it's much faster? So is the lack of personnel a problem?
Oh, for sure. I think it's physically, I'm critical of the fact that applications aren't being reviewed in their entirety, but I also recognize that it's impossible, given current staffing levels, for all applications to be reviewed in its entirety. I don't know what the solution is, and it's a challenging question, but the sheer amount of volume, I can't imagine the work that a visa officer does in terms of the sheer amount of pages that they are legally expected to read in a given day.
Monsieur Christian.
Dr. Christian, I'll let you have the final word. I only have one more minute. What's your number one priority? If you were to make a recommendation for the study that we're about to write, what would be your number one recommendation?
My number one recommendation, considering the fact that IRCC is using and will continue to use artificial intelligence technology, and that is inevitable. My number one recommendation is that we should have an independent body of experts to oversee IRCC's use of artificial intelligence technology. That will be my number one recommendation. And I'm making that recommendation based on lack of transparency surrounding IRCC's use of that technology. As someone who works in that area, I'm really, really concerned about that lack of transparency. And I believe many immigration lawyers in Canada are really concerned about IRCC's lack of transparency with regards to its use of computer technologies and artificial intelligence technologies.
Thank you. We will now end our first panel with Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 2.5 minutes. You can please proceed.
I'd like to go back to Professor Christian on my last question around the mandate. If you can answer that question, please.
Please, can you repeat the question? I can't maybe forgot. Are you talking about the mandate of the committee or the mandate of the advisory body I suggested?
Sorry, Madam Chair, if I could save my time on this. It seems that there were some technical difficulties. I couldn't actually hear Dr. Christian's answer, nor I think he didn't hear my question.
He wanted clarification what question it was. So if you can just provide him,
okay,
like what exactly?
Yeah. So my question is with respect to a mandate of a review for the AI system as it relates to the Polera report, and to try and get at inheritance and as well as is discrimination within IRCC, what should that mandate of that review be?
So the first mandate should be to have safeguards around the use of historical data in training AI being used by IRCC, and also being able to determine what aspect of the IRCC visa processing is appropriate for use of artificial intelligence technology. Thirdly, AI should not be making immigration decisions. AI should be providing visa officers with information they need to make the decision themselves, but that decision should not be made by AI.
On the issue around overall discrimination within IRCC, as the information that's been provided from the Polera report, what is your number one recommendation to the government in terms of taking action to address this situation? Professor Christian?
My number one recommendation will be to further study the issue that was raised by the Polera report, interview more individuals in IRCC to be able to identify the full extent of the problem of racism in IRCC, have a clear framework for addressing the issue of bias in processing of immigration application in IRCC.
Mr. Marins, the same question.
I think that, especially when it comes to the processing of visas from Africa, complete new training or some sort of review of staffing to figure out why the approval rates are as low as they are.
Thank you. With this, our first panel comes to an end, and on behalf of all the members of the committee, I would like to take a moment to thank all the three witnesses for appearing before the committee as we start an important study. So I will suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that the clerk can do the sound checks for our second panel. I see them, they are here, so the meeting is suspended. For this panel, I would like to welcome Biba Swigger, Chief Executive Officer, Calgary Immigrant Women's Association. We are also joined by Anila Lee Yuan, President and Chief Executive Officer for Center for Newcomers. And our third witness for this panel is Fatima Filippi, Executive Director for Ragsdale Women's Center. Thank you for taking out time to appear before the committee. All the witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we will proceed to our round of questioning. So we will begin with Ms. Swigger, the Chief Executive Officer for Calgary Immigrant Women's Association. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
I apologize for rushing with my testimony. I thought I was asked to speak when you originally wanted to introduce us, so I apologize. So we have worked with a total of about 23 officers over the years, and I believe about 27% of them were racialized. We believe that as a settlement agency, the highest level of helpfulness that we can provide in relation to the study is the extent of differential outcomes for our racialized clients. RCC survey report.
So I've select the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So the RCC survey report indicates that many of the surveyed employees were in Canada by virtue of immigration and grateful to be able to contribute to the work and mandate of IRCC. This is in line with our agency's experiences as well. Over 90% of our clients are racialized and 76% of our staff and leadership team as well. By extension, when working with CIVA, IRCC is working with approximately 12,000 racialized immigrant women annually. Our statements on differential outcomes are based on decisions around program funding, client service, and policy. On the issue of discriminatory rules for processing immigration applications from some countries that are different than others, this has been observed and voiced by some CIVA clients on study permits through different streams. Student direct stream takes up 20 days for the currently listed 14 countries on IRCC webpage, while processing times under the regular study permit can take anywhere between 90 and 300 days. We have observed that clients who came on student visa from Nigeria typically do not bring their children with them, as there is a higher rate of refusal when children are included in their study permit application. They access CIVA for supports with applications to bring their families to join them after they themselves make their way to Canada. As a result of such delays caused by differential processing times, we have to deal with additional stressors arising from delayed family reunification, including parenting challenges and family conflict, both of which have far-reaching effects on families. An extreme example around the notion of regional experiences is the case of a Sudanese CIVA client who sought private refugee sponsorship for her daughter and 8 children. The application has been in the queue in Nairobi since December 2020 and will cost the private sponsoring group $80,000. The sponsoring group has already spent over $15,000 last year on food, medicine, a mud hut home, and schooling for children during that wait period. While some visa offices in other countries processed applications throughout COVID, Kenya's office was closed. Private refugee sponsorship, a point of Canadian pride, will falter under these high-cost courses and uneven times. An example of differential funding decisions by IRCC is the federal government's decision at the end of 2018 to invest into specialized employment programs for racialized immigrant women across Canada. Agencies were invited to apply for a 28-month project to facilitate employment bridging programs. After the federal election in 2019, the same government that enacted the funding decided to rescind the funding decision, cutting the project after only 16 months. Widely perceived as an election promise to attract voters and capture the ears of newcomers at that time, we felt that this decision could be perceived as hugely differential, Due to our capacity and other funding supports we had to access at that time, we did complete the project in line with our original timeframe of 28 months. In relation to increased automation of processing, embedding racially discriminatory practices in a way that will be harder to see over time, this is really close to our heart because we believe we know a lot about risks associated with this. High-level decisions by IRCC in relation to service delivery improvements directly affect service provider organizations and clients. These decisions should be executed after formal consultation and research with stakeholder engagement. Unanticipated outcomes need to be heard and mitigated. Negative outcomes of rushed automation decisions will definitely affect highly barriered newcomers, including those who are racialized. We recognize that processes and analytic-driven approaches are necessary to deal with backlogs. However, automation in processing vulnerable population should only be called an improvement if it has a well-defined exceptions.
Sorry for interrupting, Miss. Your time is up. You will get an opportunity to talk further when we get to the round of questioning. With this, we will now proceed to Ms. Yuan. Ms. Yuan, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here today from the traditional land of Treaty 7 in Calgary, Alberta, which the Blackfoot name is Mohkinstsis. I am the President and Chief Executive Officer at the Center for Newcomers. I have 5 points that I wanted to bring up in relation to racism and discrimination and systemic barriers in terms of IRCC. And although there are some really wonderful things that have happened over the last few years, including our Indigenous education for newcomers as a priority, more priority on LGBT plus racialized communities and other things, I thought I would use this time to speak to some of the things that we see as barriers and where we would like to see some changes. The first is what is true and also perceived in the general public as differential actions for displaced peoples dependent on where they come from. We see this much more broadly, especially right now, where we are still as settlement agencies reeling from the acceptance and assistance of Afghan refugees. And that has been, of course, as all displaced people in war has been very difficult. In terms of the community, but we're seeing much easier ways of coming to Canada for Ukraine and for Ukrainian citizens. And that is problematic in what we say to our clients and what we say to the community in terms of why there was a difference between racialized communities, whether they were Syrian, whether they are Iraqi, whether they are coming from Colombian or South America or anywhere else, Punjabi, if they're coming as political refugees, potentially from India, all these different places that are racialized. Yet, as much as we do support the Ukrainian community, and we support every community, there is a huge difference, and the only one that we can see visibly is race. And that is really problematic in terms of the work that we do. The other piece that's related to that is differential treatment based on immigration status. So we have a very legal mechanism of claiming asylum once people come to Canada, yet they are not allowed any of the services or any of the settlement support while they're going through their process of becoming permanent residents. This also has detrimental effects on their longevity in terms of there's many studies that show that children and grandchildren will continue to be in that trauma state because they have not, their parents did not receive the kind of services until a few years in when they have received their refugee status. That is also problematic. We see this also in terms of what we're going to do with those Ukrainians. Currently, they are being marked as temporary residents. What are we going to do if they seek asylum and they choose to stay or they cannot go back? And what kind of services will we be able to offer? Because currently, as settlement agencies, IRCC does not allow us to offer services to temporary residents, nor to refugee claimants. So this is problematic in terms of how are these communities going to be able to get assistance. One of the things that we learned during the COVID response, we were the group that was responsible for a 99% vaccination rate, the first in Canada, and most certainly in Alberta, from the lowest to the highest in Northeast Calgary, which is a very highly racialized and newcomer community space. One of the things that we were able to prove is that people in times of crisis, whatever that crisis is, even if they speak English or French fluently, their dignity is to provide them dignity, is to provide them the ability to speak in first language. And that is another thing that we think is extremely important in terms of all the services that are offered, that not only should they be in English and French, but we should make a concerted effort to be able to, especially in times of crisis, have first language support. One of the things that we saw through COVID is that IRCC officers are not designated as essential workers. So the offices were closed. If they were essential workers, we wouldn't see such a disparity between the services offered for newcomers and immigrants compared to other communities. And then lastly, in the last maybe decade, funding has typically excluded ethnocultural community groups. And we think in terms of being natural supports to our community, we really need to look at more funding options for ethnocultural community groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yuan. We will now proceed to Fatima Philippi, Executive Director, Rexdale Women's Center. Ms. Philippi, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Thank you. Is my microphone working now?
Yes, it is.
Oh, thank God. Okay. Thanks to the staff, the tech staff, they work wonders. So thank you for having me here today. I'm a little bit nervous, so please bear with me, but I just wanted to talk about a little bit on a more personal level, my experience with the organization and IRCC. And our organization was established in 1978, and we assist newcomer, immigrant, and refugee women and their families to overcome the challenges they face when integrating to Canada. Last year, we provided services to well over 8,000 individuals during the pandemic. And I would also like to state that since 2019, I've been the co-chair of the Women's Caucus of the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, an umbrella organization of immigrant serving organizations in Ontario. As many of our sector colleagues, we were angered and saddened by the findings of the Polera report. And yet, as much as we are angered, we are not surprised by the findings. And I would like to start off by relating some of my organization's experience in working with racialized women communities and IRCC. We have experienced deferential treatment in budget negotiations. I know, Ms. Yuan, you talked a little bit about funding options being more open, and this is one of the things that we wanted to talk about as a women's organization working with racialized women's communities. We have been asked to provide additional details that other sector providers have not been had to provide. An example includes a detailed breakdown of the administrative budget costs when other sector providers were not required to do so. We were also asked for this information to justify the administrative percentage being requested under IRCC, even though the contract clearly states that we can claim up to 15%. We now comprehend that if the settlement officer was from a racialized community, in this case, this officer was, they needed to provide additional due diligence in order to substantiate their recommendation and to provide proof for effectively managing our contract agreement and our file. I have heard from one settlement officer who has now left the department that upon returning to the office from his visiting my agency, he was chided for how does it feel to work with a women's organization, as though our portfolio was somehow demeaning and of lesser value in comparison to managing other portfolios. This is concerning for us and how we see that racialized staff are being passed over for promotions and having to work harder to justify their decisions and their decisions being questioned when working with sector service organizations. And thus we are equally concerned for how this reflects on decisions on how racialized communities are being allowed into Canada. I have heard from our agency settlement counselors that our racialized clients must undergo additional steps in order to fulfill their requirements in the application process. I know Dr. Christensen spoke at length about that in the Chinook process. We've seen a great many clients being requested DNA testing for family members, a costly process which is often difficult to obtain in some countries and causing extraordinary delays. Security clearances are also expensive and difficult to obtain. Specific countries having visa requirements and an additional financial burden. We have also now started to hear from our Muslim female clients that they're being asked questions of sexual nature with regards to the relationship with male spouses to provide proof of marriage under the family sponsorship program. We ask ourselves, are these procedures and questions being asked of all potential newcomers and immigrants, or is only a select few? I would also like to take this opportunity to present some recommendations as my role as the co-chair of the OCASI Women's Caucus. Number one, we recommend a comprehensive racial equity review of Canada's immigration and refugee system, including legislation, regulations, policies, and practices. Legislation, regulation, and policies are written carefully with a view to eliminating racial bias. Meanwhile, even racial bias regulations can have a disproportionate impact on certain people and communities because of a deeply rooted global history of colonialism, patriarchy, and the impact of the transatlantic slave trade and genocide, as well as the ongoing colonialism and systemic racism within Canada. For example, Canada has these requirements for countries primarily in the global south. These are also countries with racialized populations. The visa requirement makes family visits from parents and grandparents and family reunification more difficult for racialized residents of Canada. In practice, IRCC has reportedly hyper-scrutinized family sponsorship applications for primarily racialized applicants, and we've heard that from Dr. Christensen. Spousal sponsorship applications for India are hyper-scrutinized for the existence of marriage fraud, and child sponsorship applications for China and many African countries are scrutinized for genuine parent-child relationships, and applicants are often asked to provide the DNA proof of relationships. While laws and regulations and policies are neutral, their application is subject to bias and prejudice. These concerns are highlighted by the IRCC employees in the 2021 focus group and IRCC employee groups. Number two, we recommend collection of data disaggregated by race, ethnicity, faith, as well as gender and other demographic factors on which IRCC currently collects.
Sorry for interrupting. Your time is up. You will get an opportunity to talk further when we get into the round of questioning. With this, we will now proceed to our round of questioning, and we will begin with Mr. Redekop for 6 minutes. You can please begin, Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all three witnesses. You're doing amazing work in the organizations that you run, and so congratulations on that. And I also just want to point out, Ms. Yoon, that your Center for Newcomers is actually in Calgary Forest Lawn riding of my colleague Jasrag Singh Helang, so that's kind of interesting. Maybe just with Ms. Philippi, if you want to just continue, could you give us the second and third recommendations just quickly here? Because you got cut off there.
Okay. So I won't go into great detail. I'll just give you the recommendations and not the background.
Thank you.
So we recommend the collection of disaggregated data by race, ethnicity, faith, as well as gender and other demographic factors on which IRCC currently collects data. The third recommendation is we recommend an independent review and ongoing oversight of IRCC's Chinook system and any future AI or technology used for pre-screening and processing, as well as full sharing of these case processing data disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and faith, as well as other demographics currently collected by IRCC. And the last two is the anti-racism training and gender with a gender-based lens be mandatory for all employees, and establishment of an independent, adequately resourced ombudsperson office for IRCC, and anti-racism legislation for Canada, which would give Anti-Racism Secretariat a legislative foundation and strengthen its work as well as part of the Act, subject all government legislation and regulations to a racial equity review, similar to what was undertaken under the Gender Budgeting Act of 2018.
Thank you. Just want to continue with you on the issue of family, because I know in my own riding we've often had cases where people aren't able to reunite their families, and it can be a very stressful thing. Are you seeing some trends there, in terms of genuineness of the relationship? What are the factors that are used? Can you comment more on that?
Well, I think, where we're working with families bringing in children primarily, or their parents or grandparents, it becomes really difficult. The process for applying, asking for additional requirements for the DNA testing, security clearances, and if children are nearing the age of when they're no longer going to be considered a dependent, then that becomes an additional problem for the family. If they don't start soon enough within the process, and it takes a long time, given all the hurdles and barriers that they have to overcome, then they outgrow. They have to come as independent, and families are despondent by that whole process.
So
and
so
it
just
becomes very difficult.
Those things are sort of typical of all, but have you seen any, can you point to any racism in that? Like, are there certain
Well,
countries
I think
or?
you're talking about which countries where that comes under. Certainly, if you're asking for DNA data, we're talking about here proof of from African countries. That's another issue. We have Somali clients who have to provide proof of there being their children. We're seeing it. We saw a little bit of it under the with the Syrian refugees, but not too many. I'm not sure if the situation is similar with the Afghan refugees that are coming in right now. They're highly scrutinized. Women coming from India, proof of relationship in their marriage. These are racialized women now, and you have Muslim women now having to provide information about the sexual nature of their relationship with their spouses, and that's not something that people are comfortable talking about. And of course, that's why that's happening with a certain racial communities, and we're seeing that happening more and more often.
Right.
The concern is our clients, if they don't start soon enough in that process, their children will outgrow the time become independent.
One of the other things that I've witnessed in my writing too is when the IRCC makes decisions about a client, about a person, then it's often the CBSA that has to enforce that. And I've had issues in my riding of Saskatoon West where I had to intervene with a minister to stop the deportation of a Ugandan man that because of he was a refugee fleeing because he was gay, and. It seems like the CBSA only saw a black person. Can you correlate racism to some of the actions that are then taken by the CBSA?
Well, certainly. I think it's inherent in the fact that, we've heard that, these groups are just trying to scam the system, are liars. They're trying to jump the queue. We've heard comments such as this. And it becomes problematic when we're dealing with certain officers within certain regions, within Ontario, and trying to get them to overcome those bias issues that they have, that they bring with them. And yes, these becomes problematic. It's not just one point of the system, it's somehow within the whole gamut of the system where things become problematic, and differential treatment doesn't start just in one place and stops at another level, that it goes right through the system. And we're seeing that happen. And when you have people then getting lawyers, it becomes an expensive process for Canada. They often lose. I can talk about certainly the AI example, that they lose their cases, and it becomes very expensive to administer that, and having to overturn and going through the court system and so on. But it's also expensive for the client. And the concern is, yes, why are certain groups being asked certain levels of questions throughout the whole system, and not others?
To Ms. Svieger, on the, I noticed that you have a Filipino program in your organization, and we of course have a big Filipino community in my riding. And I had a case where there was a woman with terminal breast cancer who ended up getting deported because she was trying to seek sanctuary, but she wasn't. Have you had experiences with this as well, deportation and racism going together?
Yeah, absolutely. Through many of our clients. Filipino community has been very unique in terms of trepidations and concerns of being engaged with any kind of social systems and certainly government supports because of their inherent experiences with the system. So it has been our primary focus of the Filipino program is to work with the school boards in Calgary and the Filipino community, including faith establishment, to ensure the
Sorry for interrupting. Your time is up, Ms. Svieger. We will now proceed to Ms. Lalonde. Ms. Lalonde, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all our wonderful witnesses that are here today. And I really want to reinforce and mention how extraordinary your work has been, and I know quite challenging, actually, because of the COVID, particularly impacting yourself and all your staff. So on behalf of this committee, I want to say thank you for everything you've done. My question is for the three of you, and I would certainly like to have that exchange of conversation. And it's very specific to when you're working with your clients. Does anything stand out as recurring barriers to specifically racialized newcomers, and how can RRCC address these barriers?
Who do you want to start?
Yeah, I can begin. Yeah, so just very quickly in terms of recurring barriers, one of the things that we saw, of course, recurring through COVID was really around a disconnect between the multiple levels of government. So whenever we have anything coming from IRCC, because of the way our system is built in terms of a federation, there needs to be a really big connection with the provincial government as well. And when that isn't necessarily there and there isn't as much communication happening as potential, this can become a big issue. We see in terms of barriers, in terms of not enough language support, not enough, specifically for newcomer communities and racialized communities, and also the lack of infrastructure, like I said, specifically when people are brand new and they are not permanent residents yet, even though we do have multiple pathways that we know they're going to become permanent residents. So I will leave it to my colleagues to continue.
I can continue. So when it comes to barriers and racialized population, our agency can add gender to the context of this discussion, and I'm quite sure Fatima can support it, and Danila, obviously, they also serve women. When you add those three components and connect that with the value of equity and fairness that we should be utilizing when supporting our clients, from the funding decisions to all of us who work with clients directly, you can appreciate that there is a huge quantity issue and quality issue when working with racialized immigrant women. When I talk about quantity, I talk about the amount of services that exist and that are being funded by IRCC specifically for women, and in line with that qualitative component, which is the value of equity, customized, adjusted services, from childcare to all kinds of other issues, including family violence issue that we have been increasingly dealing with. And just the fact that there is a limited number of organizations that exist to provide services for the most vulnerable women that are racialized as well, and that the full understanding of that fairness component that every individual that IRCC brings to Canada should deserve and should receive as part of their successful integration, and how that affects the well-being of those children that they bring to Canada and bring up to be responsible citizens of this country. That issue in itself speaks about a huge lack of attention to the gender issues globally, all women, and in particular on IRCC funding decisions. We are probably the biggest settlement agency with gender-specific focus in Canada, and we have tens of different bridging programs that support immigrant women to equitable employment. And we have offered those program models, outcome measurement frameworks, vetted program models to IRCC to spread across Canada so that all the other centers can use those programs. Very few of them have been reciprocated. What can you do with 30 clients that you serve through any of those bridging programs when there are 3,000 women that should have access to those programs? Maybe even in the city of Calgary, forget about other cities. So race coupled with gender is a big issue that has been very poorly dealt with by IRCC historically. I will allow Fatima to.
Thank you, and I support that. I think one of the concerns that we've had from the women's serving community is that there is no disaggregated data on the level of funding for women's organizations across Canada. We've been asking this of IRCC for the last almost 3 years and still don't have it. And when you talk about the differential treatments in terms of funding, for example, the funding cap at 15% for administrative costs in an organization, when you got a budget of a $1 million grant, doesn't go very far. And when you have an organization where they have a $10 million budget under IRCC and they're 15% administrative costs, you can see the difference and how that's going to impact in the capacity of the organization to be effective in addressing the administration of the contract and being able to serve clients, because that's where the dollars are going, to be able to serve clients. What I'd like to add is the issue of the digital divide that we've seen existing, particularly with women who are in the lower income brackets in my community. We're having high-speed internet access to services that are available through either the processing program, the applications, or even, for example, citizenship testing. We've had to create a special citizenship test
sorry
site
for
in one of our
interrupting,
organizations.
Ms. Philippe. Your time is up for Ms. Lalonde. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Desep for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's so important that you be here today, ladies. You're going to be contributing to the drafting of your report. What you say today will be used to choose the recommendations that the committee will make. I'm very touched by what I've heard from you today. And now I'd like to hear the three of you on something. IRCC has said that there's an unconscious bias in its department. But if you want to get to the root of the problem, do you agree with me that the problem has to be properly stated? And I'll say that there's a difference between an unconscious bias and actual racism. I think there's actual racism and sexism in the department. Do you agree that this needs to be clearly stated?
Thank you so much for speaking to that, because I think that is one of the problems. I think often in polite society, we will often talk about unconscious bias. We will talk about cultural competency. We will say all of these kind of words that we make, look very, very nice and very flowery. But really what we are experiencing and what we have seen and what the Polaris report has stated, along with incidental conversations with IRCC staff and other colleagues, that there is real racism, there is real discrimination, and if we don't name it and we don't utilize the appropriate measures, like any other type of action, if you want to change it, we absolutely need to be able to have those people in the room. There needs to be when we look at things from an equity lens, we're not asking for proportional representation. We're asking for equitable representation, which means in all levels of IRCC, there needs to be much more proportional and equitable representation of the BIPOC community. And there needs to be, in my humble opinion, a lot more anti-racism training. And the word out there that everybody is scared of, and which is really interesting, because back in the 90s, nobody was scared to say this, but nobody wants to talk about white privilege anymore. But back in the 90s, it was something that we could talk about and we could see as something real that we needed to address. But these days, it's very difficult to talk about that. So I'm really grateful for the question that you asked, because I agree with you 100%.
J'aimerais attendre les autres.
I'd like to hear the other witnesses quickly, and then I have the last question for the three of you.
I will just add very quickly that unconscious bias is a phenomenon that we all need to acknowledge, that comes from the lack of education and understanding of the issue. By some of us are more educated in one area and more experienced in one area, and some of us are not as well informed in some areas. The problem is that the last entity of the federal government that could ever claim the benefit or the right to exhibit unconscious bias is IRCC. IRCC exists to work with us, settlement sector, and all the other partners to provide equitable services for newcomers. I would say they do a very good job of talking to us, of asking for our experiences. I would like to believe that they appreciate our feedback. However, they have to take the responsibility for their own lack of knowledge think that the message that they send through this report is that at the core of Canadian philosophy about newcomers, equity, acceptance, lies their ability and proficiency and ability to understand the issue that they are making decisions about millions of people that have come to Canada over the years. So I don't think that anybody can get any kind of a pardon when it comes to not being well aware about the issues of racism, discrimination, sexism, gender issues as it relates to the immigration and the benefits that this country receives from immigration, both for nation building and labor market needs. So immigration is essential to this country. In the third quarter of 2020, there was zero population growth in Canada. So those who make top decisions about immigration cannot allow biases.
I'll be running out of time, but I have a question for you, Ms. Philippi, directly, since you haven't had a chance to speak. We've been hearing that there's a real lack of transparency at IRCC. This lack of transparency, combined with racism and sexism, is that not a disastrous combination for immigrants?
Oh, absolutely. It's disastrous. I think it speaks to how funding is allocated based on that. And of course, it has disastrous impacts and effects on the communities that are potentially being served by the organizations that are under-resourced to provide those services. And I think we have to recognize that there's a relationship between the two. And when you think about all of that, yes, it is disastrous. It's you're welcoming, you're saying, welcome to our Canada, we're an open society, we're multicultural, and then surprise, when you walk in and you hit the reality, when they hit the ground running, it's very different. And people experience differential treatments and begin to question, did I make the right decision? Did I make the right choice?
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Philippi. The time is up for Mr. Brunel Desep. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your presentation and as well as for the work that you do in our communities. I'd like to ask this first question. In terms of differential treatment in embedded racism and explicit racism that exists within our IRCC and therefore the policies that are associated with it, do you feel that there are any concerns with racism and differential treatment within IRCC policies? For example, when a lot of people get their rejections from IRCC on the basis that they do not believe that they would return to their home country, and when you look at those home countries, it displays certain countries that are particularly heightened in terms of that kind of refusal. In the African countries, in the global South countries, do you think embedded racism as well as implicit and explicit racism exists with those policies that results in that those kinds of outcomes? So I'd like to ask that question to all the witnesses, please.
Maybe Fatima should start this time.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Yes. That is a concern for us, and we know that it exists. We've seen it repeatedly. We have studies that have shown this. We have reports that have shown this. The own IRCC staff have stated this as a problem, and yet, we haven't been able to begin to address it. And how do we start to address that? And we've seen it. We've had people denied their visas to visit dying family members because they were afraid that they were not going to be allowed, or they were not going to return to the country or file an inland claim for refugee status or somehow disappear into the system. And I think those are grave concerns when you have families who are dependent, who need that support to care for someone who's here in Canada, for example, someone who's very ill and being denied that visa or being denied that entry into the country. And so I think we are concerned, and it becomes, and it grows when you're having denials and having to provide more data. And we talked about the DNA testing, the security clearances, and sometimes filing where an office doesn't exist and having to travel to where that office exists to make sure that we can get the application process. So all those things, and not having access to internet in certain countries is unaffordable. So yes, disproportionate communities who are racialized, who are tend to be low income are being greatly impacted by this, and it is concerning for us. And as women, I know that our reliance on being able to support our families is really important, and not having those support systems create additional family problems and create additional societal issues for us here in Canada as well as other places back home. Nina?
I can add a little bit to that. So the notion of policies is very important because they guide us all, right? They guide the funding decisions, they guide the funding implementation by all of us. However, the world is not black and white. And this might be an unfortunate, like there is no, weddings and funerals are not happening every day in our lives. So the gray, complicated circumstances affected days are the reality of our lives. So policies in relation to vulnerable population should always be accommodated and maybe evaluated based on the number of, for lack of a better word, intelligent exceptions that have to exist when working with humans. Whenever I see the notion of IT and processing and everything in relation to vulnerable populations, some women that come to us have never held a pen in their life. And then we are responsible as the agencies to transition them to independent life in Canada. So sometimes the number of exceptions to the policies and working with humans should be the measure of our ability to understand the life around us, and should be the measure for the politicians in high positions to actually position their policies towards acceptance. And that is that we exist as settlement sector. The government purchases our services because they cannot serve the newcomers, all the newcomers that they bring to Canada. Our services that equitable, culturally sensitive, immigrant-based understanding, so that people receive customized supports if they need customized supports. And policies have to be based on the knowledge, understanding of the subject matter. So it's a huge context that the government, I'm quite sure to a high level, appreciates. They should depend on our advice, all of us.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. I only have 1 minute left, so I really want to actually get at the heart of the question. Now that we have established that there are policy issues that is embedded with discrimination within IRCC, what can we do about it and what needs to be done about it? Would you support the call for a ombudsperson to review government policies so that we can address the issue of racism within IRCC? Yes, no answer from 3 witnesses very quickly before I run out of time.
Yes. Yes.
I was part of my recommendations. An ombudsperson would make a great great resource.
Sorry, and then I need the last individual, I think is Biba, who we need to get you on the record.
Yes. Absolutely in favor of that.
Okay, I'm missing somebody. Ms. Ewan. Sorry, Ms. Ewan. I need to get you on the official record.
Yes, absolutely. I am in agreement with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. We will now proceed to our second round. Based on the time, we will have 3 minutes each for Mr. Benson and Mr. Ali, and 1.5 minutes each for Mr. Brunel Desap and Ms. Kwan. So we will begin. Mr. Benson, you will have 3 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all witnesses for being here today and for all the great work you do. We've had an interesting conversation here today, and I'm kind of interested in the balance between the human resources and technology. In terms of, we're talking about immigration, and we know that we don't have enough human resources, and in some cases, those human resources are biased. So we bring in technology to help us out, speed up the files, thinking that won't be biased. So we have online applications, we have artificial intelligence, but we've heard today that the artificial intelligence is somewhat tainted also. So it's not perfect and it's somewhat biased. So how do we get the right balance between human resources and technology to eliminate any bias at all in our immigration. So if all three of you could give me your perspectives on that, I'd really appreciate that.
And I think questions are being developed by humans, and we have to vet those questions and say, are there inherent biases in the way that we're asking the question or the words that we're using as part of the question, and seeing, is that understanding what we're trying to get at? I think even asking IRCC staff who are racialized or communities, have focus groups, and say, does this, this is our intent. Is that what the question is asking? And I think we need to look at that. And, maybe there are certain words within that context that have inherent biases that are not necessarily picked up by us because there's some privilege in where we're standing at, as opposed to someone who's receiving that question and not understanding it in the same way that we do. I'll give you an example. When we say to our clients, we're doing an intake with you. And some of our clients look at us and say, are you going to make me eat something? Like ingest something? I said, no. It's a process of filling out an application form so that you understand we collect data. And so sometimes language, it doesn't translate in other cultures in the same way that it would translate for us in our understanding of where we're at within that system or within that within the sector, for example. It's a simple one, but a really clear example of how language fails to translate effectively into different languages.
I think I can also, add to that, just in terms of, I think before we even get to that piece, is what is the intent, right? I think one of the pieces that we consistently is baffling to many of us is, if we know we don't have enough people to thrive as Canadians, then what's the reason that we are putting so many barriers on people that actually want to live here and work here and create lives here? And I think that that's, some of that bias that is in that, in terms of the humans that are putting those questions together, that we need to look at what's the overall intent. Are we trying to create a thriving community? Are we trying to keep people out? And often what ends up happening with all of these rules is that we keep more people out than we actually bring in. And our overall intent is to bring in people that actually want to be here.
It seems the system is focused more on catching, the sort of focusing on the negative as opposed to the positive. And that's concerning, how much energy is being put into that as opposed to the opposite.
Thank you, Ms. Philippe. Sorry, the time is up for Mr. Benson. We will have to proceed to Mr. Ali. Mr. Ali, you will have 3 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'd like to thank all witnesses for being here. Elaborate on your recommendation for an ombudsman. How would this differ from the process available to clients through the federal court? Can you point to the other example within provincial or federal government where there is an ombudsperson that does a similar role as one you are recommending?
Sure. I think it avoids an expensive process for both the client and the government, number one. And it's an independent body, which is difficult to have an independent review within the department itself. And it's hard not to get an independent review, given the circumstances and the interrelationships with staff and supervisors and with government and so forth within the system. So I think, yes, we can look at the Ontario Ombudsperson for Human Rights, for example. There's the Ombudsperson within the City of Toronto. So there are different levels that we would create mandates to address what the oversight would be. And it would definitely provide more confidence from the community that the system is impartial and that the review is impartial, and that people who are going to there are going to be being perceived as being heard fairly, as opposed to being heard within a department and being concerned that there are already biases there it's already a predetermined outcome. So yes, an independent ombudsman I think it's very doable, and it's very easy for Canada to adopt that and to look at what are the oversights and the parameters that they would oversee with regards to the discriminatory practices that exist.
Thank you. To all three witnesses, you each have decades of experience in offering settlement services to newcomer women. Could you give us some ideas of the changes you have experienced in your ability to offer those services over those decades? Are there trajectories of positive change which we can assist in nurturing?
I can offer my thoughts on that. I mentioned that we are probably the biggest settlement agency in Canada. We are now at the 15 years ago, CIVA's capacity, obviously, that is always defined by the budget, was 1.5 million. We are now approaching $19 million funding. Based on that, looked at black and white, we would be an example of a beautiful understanding of IRCC into investment and the benefit of that investment for immigrant women. However, we are a tiny micro component of the whole country that should be 100-fold. There should be 100 agencies in this country that would be doing that, and there are many that they are doing this. So the sample of the investment, I'm quite sure that IRCC can use all the women's agencies in Canada and get the disaggregated data and get the benefits. And we actually have longitudinal studies that we have done, that we have reported around the world about that.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Sweger. The time is up for Mr. Ali. We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel de Sepp for 1.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Witnesses, you've been exceptional. Thank you so much. Finally, what is your number one priority? Let's start with Ms. Lee Yuen, then Ms. Filippi, and then Ms. Speaker.
To stop the discrimination between immigration levels, right? So between temporary residents and refugee claimants versus permanent residents, because we are only allowed to serve permanent residents with our funding, and that does not help us along the entire spectrum.
Merci, Madame Filippi.
Thank you, Ms. Filippi.
We're talking about the situation within IRCC for us, and I support Ms. Leon. Recommend a comprehensive racial equity review of Canada's immigration and refugee system, including the legislation, regulations, policies, and practices, and how that applies across all levels within IRCC and not just within one department.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Zvi.
Thank you, Ms. Zviger, and you've all been great with timing. Thank you. Ms. Zviger?
Oui, Madame Zviger, allez-y, vous avez...
Go ahead, please. Yes, you've got 30 seconds to tell us what your number one priority is.
Yeah, support both Anila and Fatima in what they have said. So racial discrimination and coupled with gender discrimination has always been and will be our priority. We want Canada to be sensitive towards racialized immigrant women that come our way.
Time is up for Mr. Brunel de Sepp. We will now end our panel with Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you have 1.5 minutes. You can please begin.
Ms. Yuen, you began your presentation today to talk about differential treatment from the government in terms of special immigration measures for those in crisis or faced with a humanitarian crisis. So my question is, should the government extend the special immigration measures to which they have offered to Ukrainians to other countries that are faced with humanitarian crises, such as that of Afghanistan, for example, Hong Kong, and Syria, and so on, and that being extending the immigration measure of allowing for extended family sponsorship to those other regions, as well as special visa applications to those other regions. So starting with you, Ms. Yuen.
100%, absolutely. This is one of our biggest recommendations. We fully support this, with the caveat that people cannot be coming in as temporary residents without the opportunity to very quickly transition into permanent residence once they are here. Because without that, currently, IRCC will not provide us the funding to support people that are not permanent residents. So we can bring in all of these displaced people, but none of the settlement agencies are able to provide services to them. And that's a huge disconnect.
To Ms. Fatima Filippi on the same question.
Yes, I think, if we look at what's happening even in Yemen, for example, there's a war been raging on there forever and not being allowed. We have Afghan refugees who are displaced in Pakistan who are going through enormous challenges to file their applications and not having that been approved. Even though they've found a safe haven out of Afghanistan, we understand that airports are not as accessible as they may be right now in the Ukraine. But other countries where we're seeing that, where there is the ability to be able to leave the country, it's not being applied in the same way. And yes, we need to look at that and create opportunities for when they land here in order to be able to support them.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Philippe. Time is up, and thanks a lot for appearing before the committee, and thanks a lot for your important recommendations and testimonies. On behalf of all the members of the committee, I really want to thank you for all the work which you are doing for the new immigrants and especially for the marginalized women. With this, our panel comes to an end. Before we finish, I would request if any of the witnesses have some recommendations or something they would like to bring it to committee's attention as we continue our study, you can always send in writing to the clerk of the committee, and that will be circulated to all the members of the committee. So with this, today's meeting comes to an end. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adjourn the meeting? The meeting is adjourned.